Welcome back to the Liberating Generations podcast. I'm Reagan Clare, and this is my amazing mother, Dr. Keesha Ewers. In this episode, we are going to explore the relationship between generational and personal trauma and your neurobiology.
Uh, Dr. Peter Kahn is a colleague and a friend of mine. We just actually spent the weekend a couple of weeks ago at an event together. He was born in Taiwan and immigrated to the United States at the age of 13. I got to listen to part of his story and am really excited to have him share it on this podcast. He has a really deep appreciation for Eastern and Western advances in natural health care and strongly believes in the God given ability of the body to heal and regulate itself. But in order for that to happen, the body, the mind, the spirit all must be in alignment for complete healing to take place. And it's his faith that gives him his passion and commitment to help patients with chronic pain find hope and healing.
Mm.
So, welcome to the podcast, Peter.
Thank you so much for having me, Keisha and Reagan.
So good to have you here.
So, as you know, we're talking about liberating generations from intergenerational trauma. And I would love to just start with having you share any story that comes up that you feel is relevant to that subject for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, so, I was born in Taiwan and, many, many decades ago. So, it's a very traditional Chinese society, Chinese values. And interestingly, my father, he remarried. So I'm, children from his second marriage. And I just remember one of the earliest memory I have is my parents fighting. So it's kind of like that's kind of the norm in our house that my parents will fight. And kind of grew up just always kind of, as a kid, you don't know any better. You just grew up with that and just, you don't like it, but you don't know any different. You don't know how to intervene. So did that have some type of traumatic experience on me? Probably. I'm certainly no expert in the subject, as you are. But I recognize that, yeah, there's probably some dysfunction and it probably affected me in how I, cope later on in the world. I don't actually have a lot of memory of my childhood, maybe because of the trauma. So a lot of it's not, I don't have very detailed memories of a lot of things. So when we moved to this United States, it was my father, my brother, and myself from Taiwan in 1984. At that time, obviously, my dad, he was already older. He had me and my brother when he was 50. So by the time we moved to the US, he was already, 60, 62, 63. He didn't speak a word of English. Neither did my brother and I. So we're kind of just starting over. Fortunately, we moved to a part of Los Angeles that, was a Chinese community. There was Chinese supermarket, Chinese store. So we didn't really have to, we can get along without speaking English. So we didn't assimilate really fast. But, there were times where, my dad would hire me an English tutor so that we can kind of get up to speed with it. But, so one of the things we do is go to fast food store and the teacher would like, okay, you order. And I was like, okay, I know exactly what I'm going to say. One Big Mac, one large French fry. And the person would be like, would you like to supersize that? Like, huh? I don't know what he said. I had a script. I didn't know what supersize me. So I would get panic and embarrassed. And how do I answer that? And then, the tutor would be like, okay, you say yes or no. So I just, had these memories of, trying to adapt, right, to a new culture. When I went to school, I just hang around the Chinese kids, didn't really hang around anybody else who weren't Chinese because I didn't speak the language. And then about a year or two later, we moved to a very Americanized area because my father saw that we weren't learning any English. So got to assimilate at some point. So we moved to, primarily, Caucasian area. I still stuck to my Chinese friends, even when I moved there, because there was still a small pocket of Chinese people. So a lot of my friends were still Chinese speaking, but certainly there's more chances to interact. And I find that I didn't really mesh with my Caucasian friends or American friends very well because the language barrier, the cultural barrier. My brother, on the other hand, a younger brother, he quickly adapted. I mean, he was like popular. I think just personality wise, he was a very extrovert. I was more introvert. He's very talkative, so I always feel like he took the words out of my mouth. Anything I want to say, he already said it. So there's nothing I need to say. I literally will go long periods without needing to say a word because I tend to just, stay to myself. So I think there was probably some period of adaptability, as all immigrants do, right? If you come to this country as a junior high, and you come here when you're 3, you probably adapt pretty quick. But if you come in junior high, high school, you know how mean junior high, high school kids can be. I certainly kind of shielded myself from that because I wasn't just stuck in a school, all just Americans without any Chinese. So I kind of just surround myself with Chinese kids and that's my circle. So I didn't really feel too much bullying, although got in a couple of fights because, Mexican kid would push me and I push back, but it really wasn't that much. Right. But still, there's probably some level of just like, man, how do I fit in? And I think I always had this thought that I want to fit in. I want to be part of, the American society. That assimilation is a great desire for me, although I find a lot of difficulty. I don't think it was until after college that I feel like my English got good enough to actually like make friends who didn't speak exclusively Chinese. I think I talked to you about this, Keisha. I said that
Yeah.
I actually learned English by, when I moved here in '84, MTV just got started. And so I literally learned English by watching Yo MTV Raps. So for a while, I was talking like a brother, which is kind of weird, a brother that didn't speak English very well. So it was all like, yo, what's up? And it was weird, Took me a while to wear that off of me to get the rough edge. But, I always say you can take the brother out the hood, but you can't take the hood out of the homeboy. It got a little bit in me. But yeah, I think there was some learning experience for sure. Was there some traumatic trauma associated with that caused me to compensate? Probably. I probably compensated in how I try to fit in. I'm very good at making friends, just surface level, just like, hey, how's it going? And just listen to people. I developed good listening skill because I couldn't speak well. So I just listened instead. But then, getting deeper was harder for me with people, because I couldn't communicate at a deeper level. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of my story and I'm sticking with it.
We actually spent the holidays in the south of France and Prague. And in the south of France, we had some friends and they were talking about that. They're not from there. They moved from Ireland and South Africa. And they were saying that it's like their kids can have deep philosophical conversations in French with any generation because they've been being raised there from infancy and are trilingual. But they have a harder time and kind of surround themselves with expats because they can't get into a philosophical level of conversation. That would be hard.
Yeah, I think now it's kind of switched because I've been here for so long and I moved to Arizona 20 years ago. My wife is, English speaking Caucasian.
Mm.
And so I kind of lost a lot of my Chinese, language fluency. So I always joke around. Now I sound like a white missionary in China, like,
Oh,
I mean, I
yeah.
don't have terrible accents, but I'm like missing words and stuff. So I can actually talk very deep philosophical with like you, know?
Yes. Yes.
But then when I try to talk to my mom like that, it's like very difficult for me now, which is, kind of unfortunate, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting the generational immigration story that, as you just said, I'm not sure if that's a trauma, but the adaptation comes from that, right? Yeah, and we kind of swapped stories of learning a different language, and I lived in Japan as a small child and learned some Japanese, very very little, but it was from watching Godzilla, And so you had the MTV brother and I had the monster.
You just stomp. You
That's
stomp on people.
right.
Okay.
The trigger response, the trauma response of all the people in the city getting like stomped on by Godzilla. So I had all of the trauma response words in Japanese. Oh no, run!
And subtitles, no less.
Now they didn't do subtitles back then. You were in Japan, so you had to learn Japanese.
Right.
So as you have specialized in neurobiology with this. And uh, I Reagan is a student of chiropractic medicine.
Yes.
What
Yeah.
school?
And
Which school?
so,
Which school are
yeah,
you going to, Reagan?
Life West in the Bay Area. Life West
Awesome.
Chiropractic.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to hear more about what you do. I know you guys have spent some time together.
yeah.
But I'm just meeting you, and I would love for you to share a bit of your story of how you got into doing what you're doing.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's a story in and of itself, actually. So, I graduated college with a exercise physiology degree because
Okay.
I was actually started out college as a finance major because my father was in business, but I didn't really do that great in it. Wasn't really passionate about it. Had
Mhm.
a friend who was in a exercise physiology major. I was like, "What are you studying?" "Oh, exercise." Like, I love exercise. I was a gym rat. I was like, "I'm going to study that." So I switched major, got straight A after I switched major, became like the exercise major of the year. So that I was really interested, but I didn't really know how to get a job with that, right? Nobody taught me that. Remember, I was first generation immigrant. My father, he didn't go to college, neither did my mom. So I didn't have any mentor. I didn't have anybody who went to college to teach me. In fact, my story of going to college was after I graduated from high school, I was just kind of like hanging around. I didn't know what to do. And I had a girlfriend at the time. She said, "Are you going to college?" I'm like, "Sure." She's like, "So how do you do that?" "Well, you just apply." "Oh, you applied to these things." So literally, like nobody gave me any guidance. So I just looked up the closest college to me, which is Cal Poly Pomona.
Okay.
And I just like, and there wasn't online, look it up online. You just go down to the school, "I want to apply," and they give you a piece of paper, you fill it out. So that's how I actually got accepted based on my GPA and SAT at the time to Cal Poly Pomona in undergrad. And then I remember the first day of school, I have no clue what I was doing in college. My dad actually came. You know how like your parents go with you to your first day of kindergarten to kind of
Yeah.
like walk you in? It was like my dad came with me to walk me into college
Oh, I
to
love
help me
that.
pay, but like he didn't speak a word in English, so he would just kind of walk, and I had to like figure out how to do this. It was just like what an experience, I had to pick my classes and walk around school and just figure that out. But anyways, so I got my college degree, but I didn't know how to like get a job with that. And then so I ended up, luckily, I have friends who were working in the computer industry to say, "Hey, you want to come do sales?" So I ended up being in sales for computer wholesale for 3 years. But then I knew I could do better. And my brother at the time got accepted into chiropractic school. He said, "Hey, Peter, you should do this. This is right up your alley, physical sports." It's like, okay, sounds good. Having no idea what chiropractic is. I
Right.
went just because I knew I could do better, right? I could have a prospect of being a doctor or a healthcare and then do something with the human body, which I love.
Mhm.
Little did I know, once I got into chiropractic college, I got exposed to a lot of chiropractic philosophy.
Mhm.
I was more of the philosophy guy. Although I did really good in school, I was more the philosophy guy. I was really interested in, the innate
Yep.
intelligence, how the body heals itself. I was more into that. So I took a lot of technique classes, Gonstead chiropractic adjustment technique. And then I got into nutrition. So I did applied kinesiology, took AK classes. So I kind of just got myself exposed to a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But of course, what you learn in school, it's always how you apply it after school, right? So once I graduated, I basically just went into. I was recruited by a company who was putting chiropractors into practice, but they were just doing regular insurance, musculoskeletal practice, which is fine because we just wanted a job. My wife and I, we moved to Arizona together. That's how we end up in Arizona. And then through that process, I learned how to run a practice, run the business part of it. But it wasn't exactly what I want to do. I always had this itch to do nutrition. I was exposed to chiropractic neurology in chiropractic school as well. That's where I really got interested in the brain. But I, again, didn't know I couldn't afford to go to, Carrick Institute and learn that. And neither do I know what to do with it. So after I got out of that uh, sponsored practice type of situation, opened my own practice, I decided to, really just investigate and learn other ways to, run my practice, incorporate these alternative things. And I think one of the first thing that happened was actually my kid, one of my children, my oldest son, Maddox, he had a severe burn injury when he was a toddler, about a year and a half old, 2 years old. And he was up in Canada in grandpa's cabin, and hot boiling water spilled outside in his body. He had third-degree burn over 15% of his body. And we literally had to transport him back to the US, to the Arizona Burn Center. So it was really heart-wrenching to watch your own kid crying, a little kid, like 1.5 year old, basically a baby that's walking, couldn't say in words what he was feeling and how he was, suffering with pain. And the doctor was putting, like bandages on him, teaching us how to change the bandages, every time stuff come off, as it hurts. It's very traumatic. But what's important after that is that he developed sensitivities and allergies to things that he was not sensitive and allergic to, like pet denders, different food responses. He would wake up with night terror every night, multiple times a night. He would have severe temper tantrums that he never had before, to the point where, like in a supermarket parking lot, my wife would try to buckle him in, and literally he would scream and kick and not want to be buckled in, and it looked like we're abducting him.
Abducting him. Yeah.
Yeah, like
Gosh.
really very hard for us parents to figure out how to help him. He also got recurrent respiratory infection where he had to go to the hospital to get like steroid treatment where he never had that before. And at the time I didn't know, but of course this is all trauma, physical trauma. I'm sure there's probably, emotional trauma involved in
Oh,
it too,
yeah.
that's incorporated into his biology that maybe he's not knowing it yet, or we don't know how that's manifesting, or maybe it's manifesting at the time. But what we know now is that severe injury probably led to a massive inflammatory response, leaky gut, leaky brain, the whole bit. That's caused him to have all these neurological symptoms, night terror, behavior issue, to the point we thought he was going to be autistic. And so that led me down the road of going through the Carrot Institute program to get fellowship trained by Dr. Robert Melillo, who was one of the leading experts on child development disorder. So I had fellowship training with him, and then continue with the rest of the, chiropractic neurology course, and eventually got board certified in chiropractic neurology, all in the effort to really see, okay, what can we do to help our kids' brain?
Yeah.
And then along that journey, we got exposed to Dr. Tom O'Brien and his gluten information, and learned about gluten sensitivity, which I had no clue about at the time, and then incorporated that. And then further, got exposed to Datis Karazian. Actually, I went to school with Datis Karazian. Dr. Karazian graduated like a year and a half before me. And so I took a lot of training from him. So incorporating both the neurological things that I learned, and the functional meta things that I learned to incorporate and create this model called neurometabolic integration, which is really a model of using functional medicine and functional neurology to help people with chronic health issues. And so I think, always there's a silver lining, is that I was able to help a lot of people with the knowledge. And fortunately, Maddox, he turned out to be a bright kid.
Mm.
He doesn't have autism. He's pretty ornery, but he doesn't have autism. And he got some other problems, and autism is not one of them, fortunately.
Good job, Dad. Yeah. Ornery, that's part of being a kid.
Right.
So, one of the things that you talk a lot about is the big, brain immune gut axis, and bringing that into your patients' lives now from this story that you're talking about. And in what other ways does this show up? Because I know you work a lot with people with autoimmunity too.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way that I came up with that terminology, or the way to explain that, by the way, I didn't really create anything, right? This is all in the scientific literature that,
Yes.
right, brain gut connection, gut brain. The
Right.
only thing that I did was just highlight the immune system part of it, because I think by saying brain gut connection and not include the immune system part of it,
Yeah.
we're missing really the integral piece of this whole entire puzzle.
Mhm.
Because much of it is mediated by cytokines, by inflammatory response, T cell polarizations. That's really what we're talking about when we're talking about brain gut connection. It's not just, the gut bacteria somehow just directly talking to your neuron. No, it's all peptides and chemicals and cytokines that's doing this. So
Messengers.
so that's my contribution to it, is by bringing awareness to the immune system piece, so that people are not just like, I have brain gut problem, let's just shove a bunch of probiotic up my butt and that's going to solve the problem. because that's not really the whole story. Some people, they might just feel a lot better by improving the gut microbiome by taking some probiotics. But in my clinical practice, I found that that's not usually the case, right? There's a brain immune gut connection, and you necessarily have to address all three areas. Especially, this is true for people with autoimmune. We know that with autoimmune, that the barrier compromise is one of the main driver for immune system activation, that drive antibody response, that drive this immune system overzealousness. So barrier, including your gut barrier, including your brain barrier, blood-brain barrier, including your lung barrier and nasopharyngeal barrier, all these mucosal barriers, all entry routes for pathogens and things like that. So if the barriers are compromised, that's going to lead to this immune system overactivation because your immune system's job is surveillance. So then your immune system start to become overactivated and start to create these various vicious cycle where more gut inflammation creates more gut dysbiosis. More gut dysbiosis creates more inflammation, drives, even cortisol response, adrenal response, drives other responses in the body that create this common symptom among autoimmune patients that have brain symptoms like brain fog and depression and short-term memory issue, that they have inflammatory symptoms like inflammation, pain, and sensitivities, and then also gut issues like gas, bloating, reflux, heartburn, SIBO. So the realization is that people with chronic condition, be it autoimmune, be it Lyme or mold, they all have similar symptoms that span brain, immune, gut. They all, if you ask somebody who's like, oh, I have candida, what are the symptoms of candida? If you just look, it's like, oh, I have brain fog. I'm kind of tired. I'm inflamed and I have gut issue. And you ask somebody who have mycotoxin issue, mold issue, what symptoms are those? Brain fog. I'm kind of tired. I have inflammation. I have gut issues. If I ask somebody with Hashimoto, what do they have? I have brain fog. I have inflammation. I have gut issue. So it's almost like it's universal because those three systems they function together and they dysfunction together. So when one goes, the other ones go with it. That's why you get this presentation of brain immune gut symptoms. But then people are trying, many people, not everyone, you yourself and many very talented people are helping people the proper way. A lot of people, they're taking this as, oh, I have brain symptoms, so I got to take 5-HTP. I have immune system problems, so I got to take echinacea. I have gut issues, so I got to take a enzyme and probiotic. They're treating it as separate pieces instead of as one unified piece and having a way to, solve it layer by layer. And that's what I see in people with autoimmune. Oftentimes, it's this brain immune gut problem.
Well, you're talking about people that are a little bit more enlightened that are taking three different things that are on the spectrum that you just talked about.
Right.
There are some people that are still stuck in the rhetoric from the Western medical model that they're taking methotrexate. They're not even talking about the brain gut, right? And immune system connection, or that it has anything to do with food or anything to do with that. And so, this idea that we're one system is really, really important. Our bodies don't see different boxes. And I want to kind of come back to the story of your son, if you don't mind, because also inside of a family, it's one system. We're not one individual family member either. It's a system. And it's much like cellular biology. If, the cell membrane is semi-permeable and nutrition can come in and garbage can go out, then it grows well together. If it's not, then we have a problem, right? So when your son was injured, Reagan knows her sister, his birthday is today. She's about turning 29. She just got married in February, and she and her husband are now in a conscious conception place for bringing a child into the world. And I noticed, this will be my first grandchild, that I was starting to get kind of anxious. And it was for stories like yours. Like, your son was at his grandfather's cabin in Canada when he got injured, right? And I just like the sharp intake of breath when I think about a grandchild getting hurt on my watch, right? And so I'm curious about how all that, because when you said this is probably a trauma, yeah, absolutely. Because this at a year and a half where your little boy was the first moment in time where he realized that there's big pain out there, big pain, right? And we all have a moment in time that we remember when we say, oh, big pain, right? And so that stays with us. It's pretty indelible. And when I think about like the position of your dad and how did all of you guys do around
Mhm.
that? How did
Well,
that
it
get
was the
digested?
grandpa is the maternal side. It's my wife. It's my father-in-law.
Yeah.
Mm.
So it's my wife's dad. And
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I think grandpa, I mean, they feel bad about it, but it's an accident, because they
Yeah.
were cooking pasta and they were just trying to drain that big pot of water into the sink, and the kid just ran around and it
Mhm.
tripped grandpa, and then just, and the water goes.
Yeah.
So obviously, they feel bad about it, but it's not something we revisit like, oh, grandpa, it's your fault. Like, and nobody says that, right? Nobody's blaming anybody except that it's a horrible accident. So I don't know how grandpa is taking it. I mean, I think he has, visited and he's been in our lives. He's doing stuff with the kids. He's a great grandfather. He's very involved. My father's already passed. So, by the time Maddox was born, by the time any of our kids were born, he was already passed. So, they didn't get to have him. But my father-in-law, he's a great grandpa. Very, very he's not a great grandpa. He's a
No, we
great
understand. A
grandpa.
fantastic grandfather.
Yeah. So he's very involved, and yeah. So I don't know how that's impacted him.
Mhm.
I think perhaps relationship wise, it probably impacted our older daughter. So Maddox is a second child. So obviously, when Maddox was going through, his temper tantrums and all this stuff, you know, the oldest one was only a couple of years older. So say Maddox was 2 or 3, the oldest ones was only 4 or 5. So at 4 to 5 years old, Maddox will kick and scream in the car while Hope, the older one, was just waiting for him to calm down so then she could potentially get her attention or get her needs met. Right. So maybe there's some of that. At the time we only had 2 kids. So by the time we had our third one, Maddox already was out of that crisis state. He wasn't, doing that badly. So, I think by the time the third and fourth child come, it was just a fact of third and fourth child. I mean, it's like, when you have 4 kids, he's busy.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I don't think if there was, I wasn't aware. Maybe this is something that I need to look into to see if there's any impact on us. I think if there's any impact, it probably is stress between my wife and I, right? Our relationship stress of like always getting pushed to brink. Kids not sleeping, they're sick, having taken them to the hospital. So then that probably made us more, going at each other's throat more impatient with each other. That's probably impacting our relationship, because we don't try to take it out on the kids. So
Mhm.
yeah, I agree with you. There's definitely, it's got to come out somewhere. So probably where it came out was, my wife and I's relationship.
Mm.
Well, your words were important to, as I listen, I always listen to language and, it's an accident, right? We
Mm.
don't. So I do a lot of trauma healing for people and I always listen to the words they use. And that's a well digested event right
Mhm.
there. But then what you're pointing to, and I'm curious about Reagan's experience of this as fourth child,
Mm.
your, my oldest son has Asperger's syndrome.
Mm.
And I know that his brother had definitely an impact with that because they were best friends. And then my second child wanted to individuate in elementary school. And it was tough on both of them to figure out how to do that. And I'm just curious from a fourth child perspective, it's kind of good to go in and ask, right? And it just
Mhm.
made me think about it as you were talking, like when you said it might have been Hope that actually, it's,
Right.
and then just be willing to go in and say, so what is the impact? Did you notice that?
I think my oldest brother, Cameron, is 8 years older than me. So when Cameron was going through his whole process, I think I was young enough, far enough away where it didn't really impact
Mm,
me.
mhm,
I think that you did a really good job of making me feel special and taken care of. I think, if anything, it would be like me and my older sister, who's 3 years older than me. There was more of a dynamic that may have been difficult between the two of us. And I think that probably has to do with girls also. Girls are
mhm,
sisters have a different type of dynamic than a brother sister
mhm,
relationship.
mhm,
So Yeah, and I know that your kids were a little bit closer in age than my brother and I. So yeah, I would be curious to see what your oldest daughter's experience would have been through that.
Or what her adaptation is, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
you were talking about your younger brother and saying, "I always felt like he took the words out of my mouth before
Yeah.
I could say them." That's actually language I listen to when I have a
Mhm.
patient, that kind of thing, because then it's like, well, then what was the adaptation and the belief system that you
Right.
put in place right there that may serve you well now, and then there may be some underlying barrier, right,
Mhm.
to it.
Yeah, with Cam, I wasn't looking to him. I was, however, looking to my 3 older siblings and watching when they were difficult to my parents, and my adaptation was, "Okay, then I will be, quote, unquote, 'the good girl.'
Mhm.
I will be easy. I will always have a smile on my face and make it as easy as possible. Because for kids, that's a lot of kids, and so I'll make it so that I'm not a big burden." And so, of course, that adaptation has its own fun little thing that comes with it that now I'm unpacking in my, mid-20s. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if birth order has anything to do with it as well.
Yeah.
Third kid may have a different dynamic. And then third and fourth, I can notice sibling rivalry between the first and second and the third and the fourth because they're closer in age.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They're always fighting with the next one,
Right.
almost the younger one trying to gain legitimacy,
Right.
the older one, because they don't want to feel like they're not as good as the older one or, not catching up or something.
Right, and it depends on who you ask in the birth order too, it's the middle child will have a whole different story than the youngest child. The youngest child will, yes, exactly what you just said, but then the older children will probably look to the youngest and say she gets all the attention, which, I mean, there is some truth to that. I think as the youngest, I did get a lot of attention, and I can now look back on that and, actually apologize to my siblings for wanting to be the center of attention. And now healing can take place at an older age, where there's not so much, animosity that may have been held um,
Mm.
in our younger years.
That's really beautiful that you're able to verbalize that.
Yeah.
Way to go. Way to go, mom.
Yeah.
It's just checking in, right? So
Mhm.
I noticed something about that, or do you want to say more?
Yeah.
And they just had something yesterday, her and her sister,
Mhm.
just a little discussion about, yeah, relationship with their dad. And I don't know, we have 3 dogs and they fight with each other for resources sometimes. And I think I witnessed the same thing to my kids and all humans and trying to fight for resources and making sure you have enough. Am I safe? Am I okay? We're not, I don't think, quite as elevated as we think we are.
Yeah. It all comes back to resources.
Absolutely, I agree. I think it's yeah, we have finite amount of resource. So, as you're, this is why I talk about fuel delivery quite a bit. If you have low energy, then it's kind of like that Maslow's hierarchy, right? You have to first establish safety and biological needs, and then you can kind of ascend to do the next level thing. So if you have lower resources or low fuel delivery, then you're probably going to be more stressed in your system, and you can only handle the lower level things rather than doing the higher level healing. So I think, yeah, it's all about resource conservation for us as a biological entity.
And yeah, you and I have spoken a lot about the role of spirituality in healing, and each individual in their own path. That any spiritual tradition that you belong to teaches that you don't have a finite, right, set of resources, that you're actually connected to something so much greater. And how does that work for you?
Well, I think it works for me in the sense that infiniteness is a something you can tap into with your mind, right? Because we're vibrational beings. With our thoughts, we can send requests to the universe. We can manifest things into our life by thoughts, right? Starts with thought, followed by action. I think for me, the infinite part of it is like what we're capable of. Like we don't want to have limiting beliefs because we can believe whatever we want to that serves us. But I think in a physical body, though, if people are not eating properly, they're not feeding themselves properly, they're just eating junk, they're eating tons of sugar, causing themselves insulin resistance, then they're going to have a metabolic problem because they can't deliver energy to their system, or they're not digesting properly. They're not digesting the food. So even though they're eating really healthy, they're not digesting or absorbing. So therefore, they cannot deliver that nutrient to the tissue. They're also going to have energy crisis. So if you have energy crisis, then I think it's going to impair your ability to ascend to the next level of healing, which is the philosophical and the spiritual healing, because your body just trying to conserve and trying to save yourself from inflammation and these metabolic crises. So I think that's why diet, nutrition is really important, and exercise, and obviously we still got to work on the mindset. But I think the foundation here, maybe it's not a foundation because they're all a foundation, right? I mean, could you have a really good grounded belief system but
Mhm.
still have a poor diet? I guess you could. Could you have very good blood sugar balance, but have poor belief system? I guess you could. So I wouldn't say blood sugar or your physical body as a foundation. I think you got to work on them kind of all different planes, different dimensions of your health.
Absolutely. We were just kind of talking about the intergenerational trauma that ties into diet also
Mhm.
in our culture. A lot of us were raised baking with our loved ones in the house with gluten, dairy, sugar. We resonate with sugar in this like really comfortable, safe way. And, when I work with clients, and I know like when you work with clients too, the number one thing that they typically have a problem with is when we tell them to go off of sugar and gluten and alcohol and caffeine. And it's like this complete shock, like, what? We live in this society where these things are so normalized and we grow up with, and they're at our fingertips. And sugar in America is in everything. And, I think it's starting to be more questioned in a widespread manner than it ever has been before. But we still have a long way to go to really break those cycles of that intergenerational way of thinking that sugar has to be in everything, that we have to consume gluten, that alcohol is a way of celebration, of a reward. It's like just rewiring the brain in that way.
Yeah, interesting. You call it intergenerational trauma of diet. And I often talk to clients about the same thing in that is the heart disease genetic, or is it hereditary or passed down?
Mhm.
And sometimes a family has a family history of heart disease because everyone in the family eating at McDonald's 3 times a day for like years, so therefore everybody has heart disease. So in that case it's not genetic, but as you call it, intergenerational trauma of passing the poor diet
Right.
through habit, right? So then they see that as normal. Uh, yeah, that's a great way to call it, actually. Intergenerational trauma diet. And what I call it is just basically you're passing down your habits to your offspring, and they're eating the same way as you. If the way you're eating is creating health, then you're going to pass down a healthy habit and healthy offsprings, not through a genetic manner, but really through an epigenetic influence by the way that your belief system works. So by shifting belief system, we can literally break that intergenerational trauma. Is it? Can I say that, Keisha?
Yeah, absolutely. And they do know what to say when they're asked about supersizing. They're saying yes.
Yeah.
Y señor.
Yeah. Which is a big mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked about a lot of amazing things here. So I'm curious, do you have tools that you'd like
Mm.
to kind of provide for our listeners?
Well, I don't know if it's tools, like, hey, I have a 3-step program, but I think
Yeah.
it's just things,
Just
it's more
practice as you
adaptation.
do, Peter. Just
Yeah.
practice as you do.
Yeah, it's adaptation, I think. It's just kind of like by necessity. I don't know if there's a specific practice that I'm currently doing that's continually that I've been doing for years that's helping me. But I think in the past, um, well, actually, I guess when I was in college, maybe post college, I got into this self-help stint, where got exposed to like, oh, I didn't know like in Barnes Noble, there's a section of books called self-help.
Mhm.
And that self-help section was things like Tony Robbins and Wayne Dyer and Deepak Chopra. So it wasn't self-help just like new age self-help. It was self-help as far as like, hey, you have personal power. You can
Yeah.
change your belief system, right? The magic of winning, the magic of what? Winning big. What's the guy's name? You know, I have a book. I have too many books down here. But anyway, all these books about mindset, right? All these books about Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. So when I got exposed to those books, I got exposed to the idea that we can control our destiny with our thoughts. That and that when we think positive thoughts and act on them, then we can literally change our life. And that's when I started to let's start to have. That's when I started to think bigger for myself instead of
Mhm.
just like, oh, this is just what I'm doing and not being aware of where I'm going in my life. I had more purpose. I want to play on a bigger field. And then when I graduated from chiropractic, it just this process of ending improvement for me. That's kind of like just I don't think I had that as a child necessarily, although I think I did have that through sports because I was very athletic. I love playing sports and I love to compete. And so through sports, I learned to always improve my free throw shot, improve my snowboarding, improve whatever. So I have that going for me. But other than that, I think just being exposed to new ideas that actually was very helpful, that served me, that got me to get in the mindset where I was able to grow. And then, and I think I really always, I mean, I accumulated, this is not a virtual background. This is an actual bookcase. Thank you very much. I have a lot of books on just self-help over the years that really have served me well. And that's always something that I'm continuing to do. I'm continuing to look for content that's going to help inspire me, motivate me, and that tells me about universal truth. I think one thing is that I'm always search for truth. And that's why chiropractic neurology, when I first got exposed to it, was so interesting to me because a lot of it was like tying together, oh, this is what chiropractor 100 years ago were talking about, but they didn't really have the science to explain it. And now we know how to explain it better. Some of the models of old chiropractic explanations are outdated, but some of it really still stay true. But then so what are the unifying universal concepts? And those are the things that I tend to gravitate toward, both in functional medicine, but also in philosophy and in how I seek to live my life. So I think reading and just always being open to new ideas. And I can tell you also, I also have times where I had to shadow old ideas, where things I read from some book, I thought it was the truth, and I read another book, like, oh, maybe that disproves that. I have to be okay to let go some of the old truth to let the new one in. So be flexible in the thinking so that I can take in new information.
Mm,
I'm going to name
love
that
that.
as a tool called curiosity.
Yeah.
I think that
There
you
you
have a lot
go.
of curiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I also heard another tool, and you mentioned it just a second ago, but just to name them, curiosity and also exercise.
Oh, gosh,
Exercise
yeah.
has been a really important one for you. And I know that we hike almost every single day, go up the mountain with our dogs. It's
Yeah.
a really important one.
It
So
is.
yeah.
Well, I would say not only exercise, I think mindful exercise,
Yeah.
Yeah.
like you can just hike or you can be very mindful while you're hiking. How's my ankle doing? Am I pushing harder? Am I going faster? Am I performing well today? I think that mindful feedback, right? Mindfulness in everything is key. And that's why I love sports because in sports, say I'm working on my basketball shot, I have feedback. It's the shot going into the hoop. And if
Mhm.
it's not, then I can be very mindful about my technique, my shooting skill to continuously refine. Golf, like for example, it's another thing that requires you to be continuously mindful because it's such a depreciable skill that if you don't practice, you don't constantly improve. I mean, you can constantly improve. You never get good enough. Tiger Woods or the best golfers still working every day to become better golfers. So those type of activity is very good because it not only develops your mind and your body, it gives you a mind a chance to quiet so you can focus on the activity, but also kind of builds the habit of continuous improvement, which is really why I push my kids to do sports. And when they do sports, I'm teaching them to work hard, to be mindful of the feedback, to listen to coaches, and to continuously improve the game.
And discipline.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
Mm.
thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your wisdom and your stories. Been
Yes.
really, really beautiful to witness, and I'm sure will help many people that are
Mhm.
viewing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share. This has been a very fun one. Typically, I get asked brain God, functional medicine. So this is definitely different, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
All right, everyone. Until next time, be well.